14th, 11 a.m. So I will call this special council meeting to order. Suggest as business as usual, just being done just a little wee bit different. And again, I'm joined here in the committee room at the town hall. And we're at least 2 or 3 hockey sticks away from one another. Megan, our clerk, and Andrew, our CAO. And again, I'll be taking some directions, of course, from our clerk, Megan, but Nina is going to be directing traffic for the most part with us today. So again, I welcome my colleagues and staff, and as well anyone else that's joining us to listen for this special council meeting. Clerk also advises me that there are no agenda announcements and or amendments, seeing that this is a special council meeting just with one item as well. But just for the record, has any member of council any disclosures at this point in time? Unless I hear, I'm just going to assume that no one does, and we will move forward. Now, also, members of council, you'll see on the agenda, those of us that are following it, you'll see a confidential section there. That's only there if needed. Now, I would suggest and urge us not to get into anything that's confidential at this point in this meeting. There will be that opportunity, of course, on April the 27th, another special council meeting to deal with anything that may be confidential. So I would just urge all of us, if there is, then it's there if necessary, but again, keeping that in mind. Now, the authors, I should say, Glenn Cowan and Andrew Seltala of report ES 003-20 is for information only, and I do have a resolution that's been moved and seconded appropriately, and I'll get to that in a short while. But I'm going to get Glenn to start with to introduce that, and again, if necessary, Andrew will be joining in if any member of council has any clarification on the report. So, no, if you just bear with us, and again, I know it's not just going to be a brief highlight because there's a lot of information in that report that I just alluded to. So, Glenn, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you, Mayor, and good morning, everyone. So the report in front of you has been prepared to provide an update further to the emails and the news releases that have been provided over the course of the last few weeks, and summarize as well some of the main points that have been raised through those. And it is really important just to highlight, I think, right off the bat that with COVID-19, there are changes regularly, and therefore keeping in mind that the planning and analysis that support it are also regularly updating. And so the information itself and the estimates within it are a snapshot at a point in time when we finalized it last week, but we're going to continue to keep updating those as we move forward. So the report is intended to provide a bit of an organizational and a community update, and therefore we've tried to break it down into 4 key sections. The first one speaks to the operations and service delivery and touches on really with a public-facing focus what service delivery looks like in the current environment. Including those that have been altered from normal course, and especially in the areas where we've had to adopt things like facility closures and park amenity closures. So there's no surprise that the areas that are affected the most are the services provided out of those facilities. We've talked also in there about things like transit and the modified service that is currently being provided through, as well as things that are provided out of Town Hall, which for the most part continue to be provided with a few exceptions from a remote workforce and again, a modified basis. At the end of that section, you'll also see we touch on things like our physical distancing bylaws, which there are multiple different approaches being used within Halton Region right now. So we provide some context with respect to the thinking and the logic behind the town strategy with respect to it. And we also touch on something like the construction industry right now and some of the regulatory changes there. Knowing that is an example where we are seeing very rapid change, and there's a lot of case-by-case analysis being undertaken right now with respect to projects involving things like legal advice, working with our project managers and our construction partners on those. The second portion of the report delves into the workforce, and it's the first time that you'll see something presented that kind of consolidates all of the steps taken to date that have been related to things like the facility closures and the resulting implications on staff. So you'll see there that, to no surprise to this point, the areas that are most directly impacted from a staffing perspective are areas related to part-time, related to seasonal, related to the student workforce, as well as our large volunteer complement as well, because they're largely related to a lot of the facilities and the programming related to those. So when you put it in terms of headcount, you see that about 70% of those that support the town's programs have been currently directly effective, either by way of being on a leave or having a delay in the upcoming start dates for the work. The third section talks about the existing state when it comes to the financial overview, and it builds on some of the things that we provided a bit of a verbal update on March 30th. So we talk about things like the budget impact to date for that initial period of time leading up to April 5th and 6th, where we were talking about the $1.1 million figure. We talk about cash flow, and the main message there being that we are in a very good position from a cash flow perspective, in part just by nature of the way that the yield curve in our investment strategy has evolved over the last few years, really, in terms of where the best balance of return and liquidity has been. We talk about the growth impacts related to things like our building permit division and the other revenues associated with it, where not necessarily related to COVID, but we are going to see pressure there this year, just because mostly on the non-residential side, some of the applications that we built our original forecast on are still working through. They're still progressing, but they're still working through some of the steps. So there's the potential that formal issuance of a building permit would likely slip to 2021 for a couple of those non-residential as well. One thing that's probably worth highlighting is, when we look at the way we've designed the organization's financial policies and management structures, it really is focused on keeping decision-making at a couple key points in time, like the budget call report and the budget itself, so that we can always look with that long-term horizon. And in between that, we use things like internal controls, we use reporting, and then also things like reserves to help manage the fluctuations that occur. So obviously COVID-19 is no ordinary in-year event, and is really testing some of the forms of mitigation and tools that we have. But you'll see that we put a lot of focus on the management of the operating budget, because some of those other tools that we have when it comes to the capital program, when it comes to some other areas that have things like reserves, like building stabilization reserves behind them, they do afford us the opportunity to absorb some of the volatility and then still keep our decision making with those longer term horizons. So just something to keep in mind, especially when we talk about Section 4 coming up, which is planning for the rest of the year. And it's a bit of a reason why we're focusing so much on the operating budget there, because we've got those other tools and things in place to help us kind of weather the storm and still make longer term decisions with that bigger framework and plan in mind. So then when we get to Section 4, that's really talking about kind of 2020 and the ongoing planning for the balance of it. It is really important to highlight those 5 principles that are mentioned there, talking about safety, talking about essential service delivery for the public and responding to the community needs, as well as consideration of the workforce and the financial management of the organization. And that really is kind of embedded within some of the decisions that you would have seen up in Section 1 above, as well as the framework that's being utilized to think about what the next couple months and the rest of the year might look like. There is a lot of uncertainty, and the greatest question I think remaining is one related to time frame, and that's why when we talk about the financials in a second, you'll see a number of different scenarios, because that will affect the decisions made on the operational side, and it'll also affect the resulting pressure that we'll see going forward. And it is the one where there is a big question mark beside that. We've also identified some key decision dates that will come up over the course of the next few months for the organization, related to final decisions on things like what summer and fall programming look like. So we'll be coming up to those dates in June and July, respectively. We do provide a financial analysis, and within that, if you look at the sensitivity analysis, there's really kind of the 2 bookends to it are, we look at what it would look like if we went out right to year end in the current state with facility closures, with program cancellations, to get a sense of, from an operating budget perspective, what that extent could look like. On the other end, we looked at, well, if we were able to provide summer and fall programming on a normal basis, where would we currently stand? The reality and where we likely end up is somewhere in between those, most likely. The likelihood of full summer program is, I would say, it's probably fair to say, fairly minimal. That would look like a normal year. At the same time, to say that nothing will be in place and running by the time we get to the end of the year is, I don't think we're quite there yet. So the truth is really in between. And as you can see in something like the sensitivity analysis, it is still quite a wide range of potential financial impact, depending on what exactly that is. And a lot of it comes down to what degree does fall programming look like normal? And as a result, what does the associated revenue collection look like if we're looking strictly at the financial lens to it? So in that full year scenario, just to give some order of magnitude, our current estimate would be that we would find ourselves short at around $14 million of revenue for the year. There is $10 million of savings that would naturally go along with some of those costs or some of those revenue changes in terms of looking at our variable costs. And there is a number of existing mitigation opportunities that we've already identified in the order of about $2 million in total, looking at things like the 2019 surplus, which you'll see in more detail on April 27th, additional provincial gas tax funding, and some other cost savings that we're seeing as well. So on top of those, there is still work happening as part of the planning process. It talks about the 30, 60, 90-day planning that the organization is undertaking, as well as more detailed review. A lot of the information will continue to evolve as we get further provincial and federal announcements as well. So then when we talk about what the next steps look like, we should be better positioned with further insight, hopefully from other levels of government through our own planning processes, as well as fleshing out further details of some of these other opportunities that, when we get into late April or early May, we'll be better positioned to speak to some of the next steps in terms of the continued decision making, and most likely in the next update report to council, having some form of decision making in there for council as well. So that's an overview of what you'll find in the report. I think if it's agreeable and fine with you, Mayor, maybe opening up to any questions or comments at this stage would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenn, for that. I do have a speakers list here, and I'll get to that in just a moment. And again, Nina's going to be directing traffic from this end of it here. The very first speaker is Councillor Cluett, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, and Councillor Challoner in that order so far. But just in case there is a question as an example through Christine Scott, I know that some of her senior people are on standby as well. So Christine might not have the answers, but one of her people will. And I think Nina had mentioned there, it might take her a few seconds to make the connection. So if we'd keep that in mind. So Councillor Cluett, you first.
Great. Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thanks, Glenn, for the presentation. A couple of questions. One regarding the town bylaw situation. I know that other municipalities are doing the additional bylaw on top of the provincial direction, and I agree with sort of staying out of it and letting the province do the enforcement from the fine side of things instead of adding another bylaw on top of it. Quick question, I guess. Will there ever be a situation where we will have to consider doing this type of bylaw like Burlington and Oakville are? Or are we going to be holding steady and sticking with the current measure, enforcing the provincial measures?
Now I'm going to jump in here now. Mike, you still have the floor, but I'm going to go to Troy on that. Troy?
Thank you, Your Worship. As of right now, staff aren't recommending proceeding with such a bylaw. Burlington and Oakville both have, and from what we understand from the police, they have said in no uncertain terms that they can't dedicate any resources to helping enforcement with this. So at this time, we are just focusing on the educational component and enforcement of other aspects of the emergency orders, and haven't had pushback from citizens yet. As of right now, Halton Hills has decided not to go ahead with such a bylaw either. But we will be constantly monitoring, and if we are finding that enforcement are receiving significant pushback, or there are calls for such a bylaw, we would be bringing forward recommendations at that time. However, with anything like that, there would be, in all likelihood, financial impacts as well. But that would be all encompassing within any associated staff report.
Okay, perfect.
Councillor Cluett?
Yeah, no, Troy, I definitely agree with the direction that we're taking, and like I said, letting the provincial orders work. The second question I had is, I guess it's regarding the workforce overview, and I always try to look at a little bit of the silver lining in situations. And given the fact that many of the town employees now are working from home and have accommodated into the home office environment, and looking at our current core services review, is there, I guess, the silver lining? Are we looking at potentially redesigning a lot of many of our positions to allow from the work from home to accommodate our employees going forward post COVID-19?
Troy?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, we have already been looking at how best to continue to do the work of the corporation while taking into consideration the various service level changes that have been impacted. So on a go-forward basis, as of right now, everyone that can be set up to work from home is set up to work from home. And that is the vast majority of the town hall workforce. But going forward, as we do make program decisions, we will have to obviously consider further human resources impacts and what those may be coming forward. And you heard the mayor mention the possibility of future reports coming to future council for future decisions.
So what they call is, it's a fluid situation. Okay, no, I just like I said, I see an opportunity for down the road if we can, look at accommodating a number of our town employees being able to work from home, whether it be a telecommuting position 3 to 5, 4 days a week, and then coming into the office. But it does look at an opportunity going forward from a staffing standpoint and from a space at town hall. That's all the questions I have right now. Thanks, Your Worship.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Cluett. Councillor Tesser-Dirksen. Christina?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, everybody. Just a few quick questions, and this is probably more geared toward Commissioner Scott and her staff. With respect to the programs that have been canceled, obviously, I'm thinking more of the rec and library programs. It does mention in the report that there are some that are being delivered virtually. I'm wondering if we've explored any other items that we can deliver virtually at this point. I know the library is doing some stuff. I don't know how much of our recreational programming is, even if it's possible to deliver virtually, but if it is that something that's on the radar to explore? Again, not knowing exactly how long this is going to last.
Christina?
It's Christine here. Yes, through you, Your Worship. We just started a sampling of a couple of virtual programs, one being fitness for seniors and one being children's programs. Obviously, the library is also supplementing some children's programs. But again, we'll have to take it into consideration on future decisions related to our workforce and the continuation of that. And also our IT and communications capabilities. That's another factor that needs to be considered as well. But certainly at this time, we're not charging for our programs. So really, we're listening to the public in terms of the types of things and initiatives that they're looking towards or looking forward to. And so if there are thoughts and ideas, certainly staff will take that under consideration.
Thank you. And one more question, and this is with respect to this June 1st deadline by which we have to decide whether or not we're proceeding with summer programs. Again, it's a fluid situation. I am assuming that staff will put together some kind of recommendation by their own deadline prior to June 1st. Is that kind of the idea? Like, I'm thinking the week before, are you going to come up with kind of a recommendation for us, which we'll have to determine, or is it just going to go by what the province passes down?
A number of factors. So right now I'm a member of a panel of from Parks and Recreation Ontario. So on Thursday there was about 38 municipalities on a call. We're all talking about things like summer camps, special events, parks operations. Councillor Cluett mentioned the fluidity of the situation, and I mean, even we're going to be faced with another announcement later on this afternoon, which will more than likely extend the emergency declaration out even further. The reason for the June 1st deadline was really from a preparation standpoint and also communication to members of the public. June 1st related to programming. Really, it was related to regular programming. So depending on how long this lasts and what potentially it looks like, we don't know sort of what our new normal will look like. And so we just need some time to determine that. Also, there's significant training that needs to take place for our folks that deliver summer programs on the program side, and in operations, the workforce that delivers those things out, mostly in the parks and in the fellow communities. So, we don't have a hard stop, and quite honestly, the decision can be made before June 1st. It's really dependent on a lot of the things that are going to come out of the province and public health departments. So, in reality, we want to give people as much time and as much notice as possible, both from a employment standpoint, given that things have changed obviously in our world right now, and also from a childcare perspective.
Thanks very much. And Christine, since I have a dialogue with you, yeah, I can see your face right now on the screen. Mr. Mayor, I'd ask one more question of our Commissioner Scott, if I could. And if there's other stuff. Yeah. So this is with respect to a lot of questions I've been getting from some local organizations, specifically the Italian Canadian Club, looking to address the potential gap that the community might find itself in with respect to providing food bank services and that sort of thing. I know there's a lot of activity going on right now, but the questions I'm getting is what resources are available to them from the town to help them provide those services to the community at large when the need becomes greater. And they do anticipate it will become greater over the coming months as people's savings are depleted and as their incomes are really start to feel the impact of what's going on right now. So I'm not sure, because Christine, Mr. Mayor, Christine and I had a discussion about providing those community fridges for Food for Life. And Food for Life is currently working something out with the Italian Canadian Club, and they're looking to see what types of supports and resources might be available. Not sure if that's been a discussion with around the table with other staff.
Yeah, through your worship, I do have one staff member working with Halton Region, and the discussions have been various about the vulnerable populations and how we can best serve not only sort of that food bank, the childcare, the financial assistance, the seniors, people living in isolation and things like that. We haven't specifically spoken about food banks, but perhaps, and I know Joy is a attendee or participant on this call, so I'm sure she'll make a note, and we can certainly circle back with you on whether or not food banks have been discussed and in what realm. It's a collective that's being, the folks are dealing with, the region, all the municipalities, and et cetera. So that might be in a more appropriate table for that to be raised, and certainly we can circle back with you on that.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. That's a very important point there as well. And again, as mentioned, a lot of this is evolving around with some of the regional programs. And I know my regional colleagues, it's on the region. They might, and I'm just going to take the liberty to find out whether Councillor Melboof, Cluett, Councillor Bester, Hamid has anything on that. And I know Councillor Hamid sits on the Health and Social Services that get to deal with a lot of that stuff. So I'm just wondering, Councillor Hamid, has anything come up in that regard there? And I think that's an important point. Councillor Hamid?
Nothing at Health and Social Services. We've been getting update from Halton Healthcare. I was taking notes. It's something I can certainly reach out and find out about, and then send an email to the group.
Okay, Councillor.
Oh, somebody frozen? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
very good. John, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just a comment on Food for Life. The major organizations involved in running that in Milton are churches. And some of the churches have industrial kitchens. And with those industrial kitchens, they have industrial refrigeration. And so staff might want to reach out to the churches that are associated with that program. For example, at St. Paul's, it's Reverend Dale Skinner, and he is still working. And he's in his office most days. And you might want to reach out to him as somebody who is connected with Food for Life and is involved in supporting Food for Life on behalf of that organization. And as I said, most of the churches in Milton are associated with Food for Life. My question, Your Worship, just a quick comment. I agree with staff's perspective on bylaw enforcement. Quite frankly, most of the bylaw enforcement that we've seen so far in the province of Ontario has been negative. There hasn't been much, but what there has been, some people are questioning how far it's gone and whether or not a warning would have been satisfactory. Fortunately, there hasn't been a lot, but I agree with staff's perspective on this. And that's on page 4. On page 5, you talk about hiring, and the program has been set aside. Has any consideration been given by staff to establishing a hiring freeze until further notice? As just a matter of policy and protocol, so that everybody's clear what the situation is with respect to hiring at the town of Milton at this time.
There that he's co-author of this report. So Andrew, on that point, the Councillor Challoner raises. We're just getting things set up here. So Nina, I might have to go to you.
Got it, I think. Yep. Councillor Challoner, so we have not formally established a hiring freeze because in almost every circumstance we wouldn't be bringing on any staff. What we're looking to do is move staff around as required. The reason we wouldn't have established a hiring freeze is because in perhaps one, maybe 2 situations, we will already have plans to put people in place, and we'll continue on with those. So I guess what I would say is in essence, we have a hiring freeze in place with 1 or 2 exceptions. Volume.
Yeah, the reason I raised that, Your Worship, is simply because we don't know what we're going to look like necessarily as we come out of this, although Glenn has provided some excellent scenarios. But I think in every case, almost every case, there's just a fairly substantial decline in revenues, and obviously that funds our employee base, and so you don't want to be in a situation where you've hired people and you find out that in fact you're going to have to lay them off because you don't have the revenue sources required to support their being associated with the town of Milton. So I guess as long as that's understood, but certainly a hiring freeze makes it clear. And to your point, I guess you're only looking at a couple hires at this point.
Just on that, Councillor Challoner, and again, I'm going to flip back over to Andrew in just a moment. He and I have had certainly some in-depth discussions on that very point that you raised, and it's an important one, and keeping our financial house in order here in the town. Andrew?
So in essence, what we will do is we will be moving people around as required to make sure people are doing meaningful work. It would be only in those rare exceptions where we don't have the skill set that were required at the time, or that we've already moved forward with a hiring decision and we're just implementing it at this point.
Okay. Thanks. Your Worship, I have roughly 3 questions. My second question.
Go ahead, Councillor Challoner.
Yeah. Christina Tesser-Dirksen raised the issue around when services come back online. and you know, what the deadlines are that staff see in terms of being able to put together a summer program or a fall program. And I'm kind of curious, I understand the June 1st deadline. I'm not so sure about the fall program being July 1st. Why isn't it August 1st? When you look at, you know, when typically the summer programs begin, they begin in July, and you've given yourself roughly 30 days as a deadline to enact that program or service for that 2-month period. Why wouldn't you look at August versus July for enacting a fall program?
Through you, Your
Scott?
Worship. Through you, Your Worship. A couple of factors, and I guess it should have said regular fall, like July 1st being the date for regular fall program, because obviously we do have the ability to be able to shorten up our times, but there's a couple of reasons. Number one, our facilities were not designed right now to be turnkey. So depending on the service levels that the majority of council wishes us to implement moving forward, we would need to understand which of our facilities will be open. We have to do potentially a complete redo of our program plans. There are some unknowns, things like will we be fully operational on the seniors programming side? Depending on what the outcome of COVID looks like for that vulnerable population. There is the loading in of the system, hosting a registration date. So there are a number of factors in order to get us up and running. That's really for the full regular menu. We also need to take into consideration, again, what our new normal looks like and what the uptake is going to be on some of those programs. And depending on our cost mitigation strategies moving forward, how do we ensure sort of a grocery store approach to, you know, one size doesn't fit all from the types of programs that the community will be looking for.
Councillor Challoner?
Is around programs and services, and you know what this looks like after we come out on the other side of this. And the core services review, the first year, was designed to take a look at a couple departments. I'm not sure where the core service review is now for 2020, given what has occurred. I've had, you know, some discussion with Andrew about, you know, what are staff looking at today in terms of the future of some programs and services offered by Town Hall, because I see this as an excellent opportunity to rethink program and service delivery in our community. We're going to have to, given what we can see by the current budget outlook. There are some things that were identified that we should be doing anyway as part of the first phase of the core service review, and I don't know what the second phase will offer. But if staff could sort of help council to understand what is the thinking with respect to the core service review, what discussions are currently underway amongst staff about some of the things that may go as we come out of this, because quite frankly, we can't afford it, or they're just no longer relevant.
I'm going to go to Andrew on that now, where we are with that core services review. Andrew?
So with respect to the first phase of the core services review, staff will be looking at all of the recommendations that were made, and as we had discussed, we'll be bringing those back to council for their full and final sign off on any changes that we would make. With respect to phase 2, we would look at this as an opportunity to look at how we're providing services. As talked about at the original, there were some IT thoughts about how services can be delivered from that perspective. We'll use this as an opportunity to look at some of the potential changes and build them into our 30, 60, 90, and plus days to come back to say, when we get on the other side of this thing, what does service delivery look like? So this is a bit of an opportunity for us to do a bit of a look back at phase 1 in terms of what some of the recommendations were, and a look forward into the phase 2 of service delivery, which we intend to continue on with, just in a bit of a delayed fashion, but to continue on with phase 2 of service delivery.
Councillor Challoner?
Yes, Your Worship. Those are my questions. Just have one comment. First of all, I appreciate the work that staff did in preparing the report. I still would like to see an operating statement attached to a report such as this as we go forward. I think it's really important that council and other members of senior staff see essentially a P&L so that we know where we are fiscally as we move forward. And I'm seeing that in other organizations, and I think that it would be helpful to this organization if we saw that moving forward.
And Councillor Challoner, at least in my opinion, I think that's critical as well. And I'm going to go to Glenn on that point. Glenn?
So yes, through the mayor, the analysis you see presented to date has gone through at a fairly detailed level in terms of looking individually within programs to see those that are most affected. And when we talk about the before mitigation net about $4 million pressure that we would anticipate if this went the full year, that would reflect what you would expect as a variance in the bottom line of an operating statement. I do take your point, seeing it in the same kind of framework the council's used to seeing with things like the semi-annual and quarterly updates that we do. We will get there. That involves a process basically to update the financial system itself with the projections as we go. It is a little bit easier at this stage, given how quickly the numbers keep changing, to manage it in a format similar to what you're seeing now, just because we are constantly in there updating assumptions and values. But we will keep in mind, how can we bring this into a more consistent format to what council is seeing. Ultimately, you will see that when we do the detailed set of statements with commentary the council sees each year is for May month end. We also do the April month end and March operating. So you're going to start to see the statements you're more used to through those regular reporting cycles. But the more detailed analysis, like I said, at this stage, given how dynamic it is, there are some benefits as well to managing it in this slightly altered format that really focuses on the programs that are more heavily affected than others. So, but I do take your point, and we'll keep that in mind as we present those statements.
Okay, Councillor Challoner, I know that was a comment. Have you anything further?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Melbuff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thanks to Glenn and staff for this report. Most of my questions have been asked and answered, but just quick comment on the bylaw enforcement. I support the position that we're taking here, and I would hope that management will emphasize that position and direct our bylaw enforcement people to use common sense when it comes to enforcing the bylaws. I don't want to see a repeat of what happened in Oakville here in Milton. So on that point, the other one is concerning the transit. And I saw the transit report that came forward about how low the ridership were running at about a 10 or 15% capacity. Has any consideration being given to just shutting it down completely until this is over?
I'm going to go to Christina Scott on that. Ms. Scott, has there been any discussion on that? I know I've not been part of any of it, but Ms. Scott?
Through you, Your Worship, at this time, no, there's been no discussion on shutting transit down. And I know Tony is on the line, but he speaks regularly with his transit providers. The only knowledge we have right now is there is one transit system that shut down. My understanding is that was more of a union issue versus a need for transit issue. And I know that CUDA right now is strongly advocating that transit is an essential service, as it does get a lot of essential workers to their place of employment.
Councillor Melbuff?
No, okay, that's fine. And my last question is concerning an HR issue, but I know the report deals with the position we've taken concerning all our part-timers. And when can we expect to see a report or recommendation concerning our full-time staffing if this keeps dragging on?
Okay, Andrew, I'm going to go to you on that one.
So at this point, Councillor Malbuff, we're looking at bringing forward a recommendation. Not sure if it will be for the April 27th meeting, but probably just shortly thereafter, looking at the HR situation in an in-camera report.
Okay, and it will be an in-camera report?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions I have for now, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, very good, Councillor Melboof. Just a little editorial on my part there on the first part of your comments there on hopefully a lot of common sense would evolve around that. I haven't found a way yet of legislating common sense there, but I advocate as well a whole bunch of common sense when it comes to that enforcement thing there. So wholeheartedly support that, that's for sure. Councillor Ali. Councillor Samira Ali. Councillor Ali.
Can everybody hear me now?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Sorry about that. My internet is really bad, so bear with me. My question is regarding tax relief program that is mentioned on page 7 under cash flow, and I'm understanding this is about the deferral that we just passed in the last meeting. My question is, when people are required to pay a big chunk of accumulative tax when they have to pay it after the deferral is over, are we looking into any avenues of mitigating that so that people who have lost their jobs and are really struggling can find a way to pay that big chunk of money, probably in installments or any other kind of relief that we're looking into for them?
Okay, Glenn, if...
Yep. So the report to date has dealt with the interim billing. So the first interim billing already occurred before COVID. So what we've done is we've addressed the second, which was due at the end of April. We've also looked at the monthly program and to provide options there that will allow for that. We're going to be back in front of council in May with the final tax levy report, at which time we can talk in more detail about what the final due dates for the year look like and other considerations around that. In the meantime, we are working with anyone that's on, for example, the PTP program, coming up with timing that works for them. We are still working kind of up to that June 30th window that council has approved through the current program, knowing full well, like I said, that in May, we'll be back with a detailed report that looks at the balance of the year, if that's all right with council.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you. That answers my question. I just wanted to also add that this question is coming out of many, many emails and requests I have received from residents who are afraid to see that big chunk of money coming at them in July.
Yeah. If I can add one, I guess, quantitative piece to the answer for council. So we did talk about in that program, anyone that's currently on the monthly program, which again, this would be people who have already kind of, in advance of this, were on a payment plan that basically spread out the impact at any one point in time. We did open the door for the March and April payments to be deferred out to June, just to give a sense of the actual update we've seen on that. So we have in the order of between 8,000 and 9,000 people in the program in total. We've seen just over 100 take us up on that offer to change the timing of that. So it is going to be a little different from the monthly program to the installment program. I do think we're going to see higher take-up rates on the installment program, just to your point that it is more money at a single point in time than those that have already spread it on the monthly basis. But just noting that for the tangible deferrals that we've seen to date on the monthly side, it hasn't been quite to the level that I would have thought necessarily going into it. It represents about 1.5% of everyone in that program is deferred, and with the balance maintaining their payments as originally planned. So,
Councillor Ali.
Thank you. That is all.
Okay, first time speakers, Councillor Hamid and Councillor Best, and then for the second time, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, in that order. Councillor Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question, quick follow-up to the question Councillor Melboff had. is for transit. Do we have indication of how many people are using transit these days, or do we have any numbers or any ridership information?
Ms. Scott?
Through your worship, last week's count was an average ridership during the week of 275 people.
Okay,
it's down significantly, but it is in talking with other transit providers, they're experiencing the exact same type of decreases that we're experiencing here in Milton, which is about 10 to 15% of normal ridership.
Yeah, that makes sense, because we don't want people to be going out anyway. My question was, Mr. Mayor, I don't need the answer right now, just something to think about. The question was, we do need to provide some service to these individuals who are using them, but I'm just wondering if there's a better way of getting them to their essential jobs as opposed to running regular transit, considering we don't have as many people using it anymore, and we're encouraging people not to go out as much as possible. So perhaps there's a better way of providing service to these 200 odd individuals as opposed to the regular transit. It's just something to think about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, again, Christine, again, I'm not sure whether you have the silver bullet for that one or not, but it's a very interesting question as well, but certainly support giving it a great deal of thought. But Christine, I'm not sure if you got any thoughts on it this moment.
Tony and I will talk offline about it, Councillor Hamid, and certainly if there's a better way to providing transportation type service, we'll certainly be bringing that forward.
Councillor Hamid, anything further?
Well, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Best.
Thanks, everyone. A question to Glenn and to Andrew. On page 9 of the report mentions about the great uncertainty about reopening. Has staff checked with the town insurer, not only in terms of liability, but also healthcare, because there's real concern, not only employees picking up the infection, but also participants in a program or facility. Are we checking into that as well as part of the reopening?
Glenn, if you would attempt to answer that.
We have been in regular contact with the insurer through the event. So simple answer is yes, we are having those consultations to understand the advice we're getting from that industry as well as part of our decision making. We've included within that as well has been, I know to your point specifically with facility reopening, but also with things like the ongoing changes in construction and things like that as well. We're looking at a bunch of different inputs, including insurers there as well. So,
Councillor Best. Councillor Best, any further?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for letting me speak one more time here. I do want to bring up, it's more of a comment, I guess, than a question, but Councillor Best and I have been receiving lots of concerns from our constituents in the rural areas with respect to the internet service, because so many of them are working from home and now their kids are at home as well, doing online classes through school. Rural internet has been a contentious issue for a long time because it's really not very good out in the rural areas, fully recognizing that it's a federal issue. And Andrew and I had spoken about it last week about how we really need to focus on getting that up to speed for our rural residents, and perhaps other councillors have had complaints from the residents in rural areas as well. But just something that I want to highlight here, because in the post-COVID plan that we come up with, that's something that I think we really need to work with our MP and our federal counterparts in getting up to speed. Because if this had been done 10 years ago when it was first an issue, our rural residents wouldn't be having this problem right now. And it's really difficult for them to run their businesses and for their kids to complete their studies. They can't complete their payrolls for their employees. So it really does have a trickle-down effect for a number of people, not just the folks who are suffering with the bad internet. So I don't know, I don't expect staff to provide any comments at this point, but it's just something I wanted to bring to the attention of everyone.
Well, and again, in my opinion, I think it's a very important issue now. And again, Andrew or Glenn, I don't know if there's been any or much discussion recently with our federal or provincial MPPs on this, but certainly concur with Councillor Tesser-Dirksen on that point. So, Andrew, where do we go in the future, I guess?
Thank you, Councillor Tessler-Dirksen, for your question. Not much to add other than what we've talked about offline, but what I would say is we will begin to restart those discussions with the region, who's been a key player in this. There are a couple of reports they've written. We will restart those talks with both MPP and MP. And on the other side of COVID, it'll be something that we will look to re-engage with.
Anything further?
No, that's it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, that was the speakers list that I have it. Is there any other member of council, any observations, any comments, or any further questions before I get to the motion? Councillor Challoner?
Thanks, Your Worship. I just had a comment with respect to the work that Christina and Colin are doing with respect to the internet. I served with the federal government back in the early 2000s on dealing with the last mile, and it was largely rural and northern Canada that the government was trying to provide internet access to. What I'd recommend is that we spend more time reaching out to TELUS, Bell, and Rogers, and less time reaching out to the federal government until we have to. Because at the end of the day, the infrastructure is owned by them. It's not owned by the federal government. The federal government regulates them, but the investment is made by industry, not government. And we, as Your Worship, as you know, and Andrew knows, we have very good relationships, particularly with Bell and with Rogers. And I do as well. I work with them from time to time. And what I'd recommend is that when we can, invite them to town hall and have Christina and Colin and a representative from Nasagoya share with them the issues, and have the telecom industry come back to the town of Milton with a solution. Ultimately, it may require approval by CRTC, but it may not. That would be my recommendation.
Councillor Challoner, that's an excellent point, and I know staff have made note of that, and that will be followed through, because you're absolutely right. It'll come down to people like Bell and Rogers that'll make that happen there for sure. So thanks, Councillor Challoner. Is there Councillor Di Lorenzo?
I have a comment. Earlier, we were talking about health and healthcare, and you asked Councillor Hamid to get back with some answers. I was talking to Janet Skupski, the Chief Operating Officer, because some Milton veterinarians were reading in New York they have a shortage of ventilators, and they found out that veterinarian ventilators in some situations are classified being okay for humans to use, and in New York veterinarians are providing ventilators to their local hospitals. So some Milton veterinarians contacted me asking if they could donate their ventilators to the hospital, but Janet said at this moment in time they haven't reached that point. They have spare ventilators, and they don't need local veterinarians to donate their usages. Also, many groups have contacted me and other councillors to donate masks to Health and Healthcare, but also Health and Healthcare have strict requirements needing N95 medical grade masks. So a lot of the donations people are trying to do for masks aren't specifically the N95. Instead, they're being repositioned to maybe community groups. But my comment is, I know there are a lot of groups and people contacting Health and Healthcare trying to see, again, what ways they can donate items, either ventilators or masks or other medical supplies. And Health and Healthcare is doing everything they can to marshal to make sure they have the needed supplies. At the last update I have is we're in the lucky situation where we do have, spare ventilators, and we haven't hit a capacity crisis that some other states or provinces or countries have had.
Well, Councillor Di Lorenzo, thank you very much for that information. Again, I know when I say we, senior staff and myself, we're directed quite often by what the regional health people are doing here for the 4 municipalities in Halton. And I know that senior staff here are, almost daily in conversation with them with these items certainly being discussed. And I know there's a lot of very well-meaning individuals out there in groups and organizations that's prepared to donate, but it's critical that it's done right and done properly. And to the best of my knowledge, it's being handled through the regional level. And again, Councillor Hamid, who serves on that committee, I'm not sure if you have any further to add in that regard at this moment. Councillor Hamid?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, this was discussed in the hospital board meeting last week. And generally, Halton region is still a young community. I know that we have a large number of seniors here, but as a proportion of the population, Halton is younger than other communities. So because this disease seems to hit the elderly more, we seem to be doing better. And we do have the capacity right now. The hospital board is increasing the capacity. They have a plan, which I'm not sure if it's public yet or not, but there is a plan they're executing. But at this point, if someone wants to donate, there is an email link they can email. However, hospitals only taking donations from PPE equipment that's purchased in Canada or by vendors that are authorized by Health Canada to be able to import in Canada. So a lot of offers we're getting, they're really well-meaning, but they're not from vendors that are authorized to sell healthcare equipment in Canada. So the hospital rightfully cannot really use that, unfortunately.
Councillor Di Lorenzo?
No, thank you.
Very good. Is any other member of council any comments, observations, or opinions at this moment? Okay, just before I get to the resolution there, and I'm going to work on an assumption, unless I see otherwise, that it'll be carried. One of the things I'm going to urge all of us to think about, and I made mention right at the outset of the special meeting coming up on April the 27th, if any one of us has any thoughts, please make sure that Andrew or Glenn is aware of them, so that your thoughts, my thoughts, could be incorporated hopefully into that report as the further direction. So special council meetings, I know it's been advocated from time to time. If the majority of council thought it wise, that can happen. But normally that happens with conversation between myself and the clerk. So if we were to get feedback that something had to be done very quick, very fast, we can call a special council meeting. So right at this moment, we're set for April 27th. So with that, I'm not sure, Madam Clerk or Andrew, is there anything further that you would like to add? I know that pretty well captures it for me. So I'm going to read the resolution. It's been moved by Councillor Cluett, second by Councillor Best, and be it resolved, the report ES 003-20 COVID-19 update be received for information. Are there any questions with regards to that resolution? Being none, I will assume that we're in favor of it. I'm not seeing any opposition, so that is carried. So with that, it is carried. And the clerk gave me the resolution, again moved by Councillor Cluett and second by Councillor Best. And be it resolved that bylaw number 026-2020 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaw, seal the seal of the corporation, and that it be engrossed in the bylaw book. Are there any questions with regards to the reading of this bylaw? Being none, I will assume everyone's in favor of that unless I see otherwise. That is carried. Madam Clerk, have we forgotten anything? Or Mr. CEO? No. Members of council, I want to thank you very much for this special council meeting being held on April the 14th here. This council meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, members of council and staff. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Bye, everyone.